Welcome to the Hard Faith podcast. I'm your host, Spencer Fulmar, the founder of Hard Faith. I've been working in the film and television industry for over 16 years. On Hard Faith, we're about asking difficult questions about life and faith in an R-rated world.
Today's episode of the Hard Faith podcast, we're joined by a good friend and one of the sharpest, most sincere voices in faith and film, Joseph Holmes. Joseph, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on. It's so good to see you again. I mean, we saw each other last at the Hard Faith Film Festival, which was an amazing blast. You put on such an amazing show full of people who actually care about making films about faith that talk about the difficult topics. And you did such a great job. And then before that, we saw each other working on Bright Sky, which was an amazing experience. We were talking a little bit about that before the show started. So it's always a pleasure to talk to you. You're one of the shining lights in this business, in this endeavor.
Oh, thank you so much, Joseph. I feel the same about you. For our audiences, Joseph is a filmmaker, film critic, and writer whose works has been featured in Religion Unplugged, as well as many other news outlets, where he explores stories shaping our culture through the lens of belief and beauty. As co-host of the Overthinkers podcast, he brings that same thoughtfulness and heart to every conversation, bridging art, theology, and everyday life. He's a storyteller, unafraid of tension, a critic, unafraid of faith, and a man who believes that honesty and hope can coexist on the screen. This is Joseph Holmes, and today we're celebrating the release of his first feature film, Jim vs. the Future. Congratulations, Joseph. You have climbed the mountain.
Thank you. Yes, I have made a feature film, which is a lot harder than most people think it's going to be to do, and it's so gratifying to finally have it up for people to see.
Joseph, and not only did you make your first feature film, but that you actually made a great feature film. I had the honor of watching it, an early screening link, so I am special. And I got to see this film before it was released, which it is available now on all platforms, so please rent it. We'll put all the links in the show notes. But I was just so impressed, Joseph. I remember when you shared the story of this extremely ambitious, complex story and production as your first feature film whenever we were on set together working on Bright Sky 2.5 years ago. And then I got to watch the film and I was just really blown away. As a first-time film director, you seem like a veteran. So how did you accomplish Jim vs. the Future?
So the secret sauce, of course, is desperation. Because I've made films before, short films before. I did that, starting in college, and I've been a film critic since about 2020. Professionally. But always making a movie was always a mountain I wanted to climb. I think it was when my family took me to see Spider-Man 2 in the theaters. I remember just, seeing these hero story on the big screen and saying like, oh, whatever it is I'm feeling right now, I want to make other people feel like this whole thing of like wanting to be a better man, a better person. I want to do that. And so this has been a mountain I've wanted to climb for a very long time. But, as you alluded to, my ambitions for it, and partly this is being a film critic, where you start to analyze films for so long and think, okay, this is what makes a film good, this is what makes a film bad, and wanting your movie that you make to live up to how you've built it up for a really long time. I was very ambitious about what kind of movie I wanted to make and how good I wanted it to be. And I was trying to raise the financing for it, I was trying to put it together, and it was just not working. Eventually, Nathan Clarkson, who, shout out to my... Yeah, exactly, yes. You may have crossed paths once or twice, yes. Maybe like a star writer of Bright Sky, may also be that guy, yes. May also be the co-host of the Overthinkers podcast. He also was producing my movie with me and was going to star in it. And he did starring in Jim vs. the Future, which we made. But he basically sat me down and said, Joseph, with the budget that you have right now, you cannot do the movie that you want to do. You have to make a movie with one location with 5 actors max. that's what you can do. And so I sat down and I was like, okay, is there a story I can imagine telling that's that constrained, that's that exciting, that does what I want to do? Again, makes people feel what I felt and the best movies that I've seen, and done with the artistry and the care that I want movies to be made with, and do it, with those constraints. And so I essentially just sat down. Well, I didn't actually sit down because I'm a pacer. I paced frantically around my apartment.
I've seen you pace on set.
Yes, you can verify.
Yeah.
And I came up with this story and I was like, okay, here's a premise that works, that resonates with me on a deep level, but is also interesting. It's, high concept. People would say, oh, that's interesting. I want to check.
Very high concept.
And then I was like, okay, well, like, what's the next part? What happens next? Does that work? Okay, well, that's interesting. And then I kept going in, and finally I got to the climax, which, the third person who shows up, the third twist. And I was like, okay, now I have a story that I have all the pieces to make it work. And yeah, and so that's sort of the nuts and bolts of how I came up with it. And a lot of it was me wrestling with the things that a lot of, I think, artists wrestle with, which is that you have these dreams for your life, and not just your life on a personal, individual level, but the kind of mark you want to make on the world and the way that you think that your life makes the world a better place. And yet we can get stuck in our own heads without actually making that a reality, but also not just making a reality, but thinking that maybe our dreams are more important than the life that God actually wants to have for us. And so a lot of it was me wrestling with, okay, how do I actually wrestle with this in the story as I'm going through this in my own life, but do it in this sci-fi way that it's entertaining to watch and makes you think about the more cosmic implications of this. So anyway, those are kind of how I wrestled with telling that story. And then, of course, you got into the practical considerations of, like, how do we actually make this on the budget we have, on the constraints we have, which ended up being really like a blast to do. Shot it in 6 days in my apartment, which is insane. I couldn't do it without the talented group of people I had. And it ended up being just a blast. I got to have, one of my best friends play the lead and have him basically get tied to a chair for 6 days, and have one of my other best friends, Nathan Clarkson, yell at him for for the whole time. And that was it was such a really cool experience, but it did come from a really personal place with the story I was telling.
Man, oh man, that's amazing. For our audiences, Jim versus the future, give us the tagline. Give us a little bit of just a nutshell of the story.
Yeah. Jim versus the Future is about a grad student named Jim who, on Christmas Eve, gets kidnapped and held hostage by people from the future different future timelines, who are trying to force him to make the choice that will preserve their future timeline. Because if he doesn't, their timeline will get destroyed. So you have these different people from different competing futures who it's life or death for them to force him by any means necessary to choose their future. And of course, the choice he has to make is whether or not he's going to break up with or stay together with his fiancée, Kathy. So that's the nut that we start with, that escalates from there, of the different people from the different futures and the future they want to preserve and why.
Right. So I'm going to get back into the story, but first I want to touch on a couple other subjects. First, Orson Welles has a great quote, and there's a couple quotes on this that I want to touch on from my experience working with you on Bright Sky, and what I can only imagine was your experience working on Jim versus the Future. But he says that the enemy of art is the absence of limitations.
Ooh, he's so good. He has
So good.
He has so many of those gems.
Incredible.
I wonder if he's made any good movies that people remember.
Hopefully. He's still trying.
Yeah, he'll get there someday.
He'll get there some days. You know, G.K. Chesterton has another great quote on art. Art is limitation. The essence of every image is the frame. What I learned personally on Bright Sky is that I went from my largest budget film, which was Shooting Heroin, to my smallest budget films. It's my very first film, which was Bright Sky. And I realized that with a solid crew, a great location, a great story, and great actors, and you were my right-hand man on Bright Sky, could not have done it without you as my assistant director, but you could achieve, you can make an amazing movie with very limited resources and many limitations. And so many filmmakers, especially first-time filmmakers or like newly graduated film school students or aspiring filmmakers, they say, well, I can't make that movie because I don't have $1 million. I don't have $3 million. Well, one day, you know, I need $10 million to make this movie. And I tell these filmmakers, and I tell my own clients too, you know, if you had $10 million, you would waste that money because you've never made a very cheap independent film. You've never done the 6-day shoot in your apartment. You've never learned the basics. You've never shot in a Airbnb ranch in the middle of nowhere with no civilization within 6 hours on Bright Sky. And you learn so much by making these films, and you can do so much with limitations. And I actually think the art often turns out better because of the limitations. What do you think about that?
I think that that's absolutely true. I mean, first of all, I have to say working as your AD on Bright Sky was such a huge inspiration and such a huge learning experience for me to watch somebody take the severe limitations you had and just make it work and make something beautiful. Again, I was watching every shot that was coming out of your camera as you were like kneeling down in muddy grass, but capturing these Terrence Malick-esque painting style scenes where, you know, we kept trivially saying, this looks like a movie, you know,
a real movie.
but just these transcendent moments of beauty because you didn't have all of this stuff in front of you covering up the actual place we were and the experiences you were having. You were able to say, this actual thing that's in the world that God made, this is beautiful and I can see that. I'm a filmmaker and film is about camera and editing. It's about what's in the frame, what you see, and how you cut it together. That's the point of view. And so your ability to see stuff and then say, that's worth preserving in this image and showing to other people was so inspiring to me. But getting back to your point about limitations, that's where you are forced to actually see things for yourself and not the image you have in your head that other people have put there.
Yep.
Because a lot of times what you're trying to do is recreate the movie that you watched that made you feel a certain way, which again, I just said was the inspiration for becoming a filmmaker. But then you're not actually looking at what's in front of you and seeing that and saying, what's beautiful about this that I can show other people? And that's the first part of this that is, you know, why limitations are so important, I think, and really do affect the quality of what you made.
Yes. Yeah, and I think, you know, when your back is against the wall and you're forced to make something, like you don't have extra days. Your actor is unavailable. You know, there's no extra resources. You have this camera. You have to make it look good. You take the lampshade off the light and you have to light it. Like, you just have to make it as great as you possibly can with what God has given you for this film. And that's what you did with Jim versus the Future.
Thank you. I mean, it's funny because Nathan and I have talked about this on the podcast, that there is this phenomenon of filmmakers being really good until nobody can say no to them. Also.
It's so true, and it's tragic.
And we really do. We were like, oh my gosh, this filmmaker, finally everyone recognizes how great they are. Their next movie is going to suck.
They'll never make anything good again.
Exactly. And I think
it happens all the time.
It does.
It's tragic.
It really is. And I think that there is an aspect to this of like when you are strapped, like I was.
Yeah.
First of all, other people can tell you, first of all, you're more open to other people's ideas.
Yeah.
Because again, you aren't wedded to the image in your head. So you're open to other people's ideas. And other people can say no to you. But also, this is the more philosophical aspect and theological aspect.
Mm.
Reality can say no to you.
Mm.
God can say no to you.
Yep.
You don't have, again, the Bible isn't anti-technology or anti-civilization, but there's a reason why the first villains of the Bible are, talked about in technological terms. Cain is described as a person who, and his descendants are people who are, inventing these new things, new technology, and the first Nimrod is creating this tower to heaven, is because technology is one of the ways we're most easily able to imitate God and try to usurp him. And so a lot of times when you have these money and these resources and no one can say no to you, there's less room for reality, which God's interface with us most of the time, to push back on you. And it's that there's a reason why God named his people wrestles with God. It's through the wrestling with God and having someone to push back on us that actual humanity, the best of humanity, is made. And so I definitely felt a lot of God pushing back on me in this process. And I'm really proud of what I've made so much of it as a result of that.
Yeah, beautiful. So well said.
Thank you. I can be on your podcast more. It's such a you say all the great things.
Well, Joseph, I was on another podcast recently, and I'll have to tell you after the show, but they had been on the Overthinkers podcast, and it was when I had Sean Gaffney on Hard Faith.
Oh my gosh, yes, yeah. Sean Gaffney is amazing.
Yeah, and we both talked about how you, Joseph, give the best intro ever, and how we just want to record the intro that you give people on the Overthinkers podcast. And I just want to have that as like my voicemail because it's so nice.
Well, I feel like I'm just always grateful to have people on my show, that people actually come on my show. So I want to give back at least a little bit.
Wow, it's very nice. My next question before we dive back into the plot and the production of Jim vs. the Future is, as a film critic, what was the mind games that you played? I know we touched on it a little bit, but how do you overcome those mind games? We all have those mind games. How do we just get over ourselves, our own criticisms of ourselves, our own criticisms of other people's films and art and even faith-based films? I know this isn't a faith-based film per se by any means, but it deals with faith. How do we get over all of that? Put that aside, take that hat off, or whatever you do, or even keep that hat on. How do you do that and make a film?
This is a question I probably get more than any other as somebody who has been a film critic professionally since 2020 and is making my own film. There's a old phrase, which is, I forget who coined it, or maybe it's been lost to time, which is, you write drunk and edit sober. And that's usually not meant literally, although some people take the letter of my office. And what that means is that, the creative part is when you're not overthinking.
Yeah.
You're just feeling it. This is what feels right. This is what feels cool. That feels satisfying. And then, of course, when you go over it and realize this doesn't make any sense, this is 5 plot holes, the theology of this maybe doesn't go places I want it to go. That's what you do after the fact. And so there's a certain aspect of it that, for me, I had to be able to say, okay, what feels right about this? What feels right as the next step? And to trust that aspect of me, knowing that these are 2 different parts of the process, that my film critic side is for the editing side. It's not that I have to divorce my film critic side from myself, but that it has its proper place within the process. And that I can trust the fact that a lot of times I think Christians get into this a lot too, because they're afraid of, doing bad theology or having a bad message. And so they don't ever go to the place that feels right to them because they're afraid what feels right to them will come out of a sinful heart. The heart is deceitful above all things, etc. And that's true, but that's what editing is for.
Yeah.
Tolkien had this problem actually, because there's a lot of controversy, and Nathan actually pointed this out in a Patheos article he wrote, that you have the orcs who are basically treated as these inhuman scums, and it's well, that's not really very good Christian theology. And and Tolkien kind of acknowledged that. And he wasn't quite sure how to square that circle himself, but he was, doing what felt right to him with the myths he was trying to recreate and stuff like that. So like that is a thing that can happen.
Yeah.
But a lot of times we short circuit the process by never going there. Now there is there is a part of this that I have to say, which is my brain works a little bit differently than other people's, which is part of what feels right to me and makes me excited is the cognitive wrestling with what's going on. And so even when I'm watching a movie, one of the things that's really cool to me is to think about what I'm watching while I'm watching it and wrestle with the themes and ideas that they're doing and the camera and how all they're doing it while watching it. So there's a part of me that the critic part of my mind is a part of the creative process because I get excited to wrestle with the story I'm telling as I'm telling it. So that's a nuance to that.
Mm-hmm.
But the broader answer that's more generally applicable is being okay with letting the critic side of you having its proper place. It's draft 2 part of you, not draft 1.
I love that. Draft 1, and then how do you write that drunk draft? How did you write that drunk draft?
Yeah, so I mean, going through this again, my constraint was, I have 5 people in one apartment, and so I was trying to say one room and one location, and I was trying to think about like, okay, that's my constraint.
Mm-hmm.
What imagination can I fill in that's comes from inside me that tells something I want to say, trusting that again, I'm not making a faith-based film, but one of the things I'm passionate about is that so much of the world we live in today is based on what the imaginers imagine for us. Hollywood saying this is what love looks like, this is what hate looks like, this is what goodness looks like, this is what a good life looks like. And one of the things I think is lacking in the world, and this is again why I love what you do so much, is that somebody with a Christian imagination, that God imagines a different way of what beauty looks like, what love looks like, what happiness looks like. And because I've been formed to the church for so long, getting to express that in a particular way, that way of imagining the world, and say, okay, what's something that can flow out of that imagination, but done in a way that you maybe haven't seen before in kind of the faith-based world, which is kind of has its own limitations it's setting on it. It's not done in a way that's, science fiction. That's, one of the things I really was excited to do, again, was say something, like the story deals with the multiverse is a huge part of this. And one of the things that I've been frustrated by is that the multiverse is really a modern secular myth.
Sure.
And really a nihilist myth, because it's saying that every choice we make is basically meaningless because it doesn't really have an impact on the world, because whatever choice we make, it splits off into another version of reality that made the opposite choice. And there are different, like Everything Everywhere All at Once tries to square the circle and say that life is still meaningful, even though this is the reality of the world. But of course, that's not my experience of the world. That's the reality of the world. My experience of the world, and as I was getting older and making more choices that have more consequences, seeing that actually the stakes are really high.
Yeah.
And having a Christian cosmology that says the stakes are really high, actually, when you make choices, you destroy other possible futures. You don't create more. I mean, you create some more within those limitations, but you destroy them. I was saying, what is something like that? What is maybe a Christian imagination of something? What is a way, not just saying, okay, let me force this theology in here, but saying, what's a part of my imagination of the world that I can share with others that I don't see other people doing, that flows from my faith and flows from my imagination? And so, again, I had that mission statement of like, what do I want to see in the world expressed that way? And what can flow out of me and I'd be excited to share? And I, thought, okay, if you have something that's in one location, somebody getting held hostage and kidnapped. First of all, that's just very exciting. That's very visceral. You start the movie that way, and the claustrophobia of the location becomes a part of what's exciting about it.
So true.
Not it doesn't feel like, again, if you're doing like a rom-com, it's like you want people walking around in the city, like it's, you got mail, you want to see, or if it's a superhero movie, you want to see it's like, no, but if it's a hostage situation, then the claustrophobia is part of it. So, okay, what's cool about that? What's the stuff? And then if it's a movie that's, again, just about people kind of having conversations with each other, what's something that has stakes? What's something that's, you can... And one of the things, again, I love stories that work on the levels of, here's the bigger ideas it's dealing with, here's what makes it personal, and here's how in personal in terms of themes that we can all relate to, but also personal in terms of these characters. And so how do I do all of these in the story? How do I create characters who that's what they're doing? It becomes a duel of worldviews, of ideologies, but also just what am I going to do tomorrow that makes this personal? So again, it's, I've become more and more someone who believes that the ordinary acts of heroism of everyday life, of deciding that you're going to be a good person, deciding you're going to take on responsibility as an adult, all of these things are what save or redeem the world. And so getting to say, hey, this, in sort of That Hideous Strength, C.S. Lewis deals with this. It's like, the salvation of the world depends on a husband and wife just deciding they're going to stay together. Like, that's the cosmic. And so these are all these things that are coming out, and I say, okay, if I am telling the story of something that's just going on, it's a relationship between two fiancés, two people who love each other, and essentially the angels and demons of the world are coming to try to destroy it in this, then the smallness of it that is represented by the bigger stakes, again, that becomes what the story's about. It doesn't become a limitation of it. So that's a lot of, and then of course, again, there's the mechanics of it. You have the first person who comes in that says, here's a choice I want you to make. Then and he's one kind of person. Then you have somebody else who comes in and has a different view and a different style. He's a different kind of antagonist. And then you have somebody else that brings a different perspective. And again, as an overthinker, this is just a part of my living in the world, having these voices in my head that you have to navigate in that way. And so getting a chance again to express that and share that was a huge blessing and a huge grateful for the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. This is so much an overthinker's film. You tackle a lot in this movie, and you do it well, and it's a deep thinking film, which I love. But like you said, you start on like a big idea, and you personalize it, and you show the effect on the individual characters. I think another filmmaker that does this really well, and maybe not as always elegantly or eloquently, is Chris Nolan, because he'll take
the patron saint of 30-year-old white men. Yes,
that is the patron saint of 30-year-old white men. He takes big ass ideas, and then he personalizes it to individual characters, and you make them, and it makes you care about them. He's
definitely a heavy influence on myself as a filmmaker, because again, he doesn't try to hide the fact that he's thinking through these things, not just feeling them.
Yeah, and they're big, complex ideas. Because even too, like you tackle a lot of different topics. Like there's, the topics of free will versus predestination. There's topics like you just discussed about as far as, how would it look if we redefine the world, not in how Hollywood defines it, but in how God defines it, in God's kingdom, and what that looks like. Reminds me of like Abraham Kuyper and like Kuyperianism. And then also just the effect of everyday choices and what effect that has in eternity. And is this just random? Is it meaningful? Is it divine? And that's a lot to tackle in one feature film.
Yeah, no,
How would you do it?
Well, because those are the kind of stories I love, and those are the kind of stories that I think human beings are individual personal beings.
Yeah.
And I think human beings are also tied together in experiences we share in common. And people are also connected to God and the universe and the meaning of life. We need to, I need to know, how do I love myself? How do I love you? How do we love each other? And how does that all fit into our relationship with God and the kingdom of God? There's Jonathan Haidt, who wrote Anxious Generation. He actually talked about the fact that one of the big reasons that we're actually so, and you can see this sociologically, why depression and anxiety are rising so much, is because we're subdividing into smaller and smaller sub-communities and cultures. And human beings are the most happy when they are tied together in tight-knit communities together, worshiping the same God or the same highest values. They need to go to a church once a week, worship the same God, worship the same values, and then they actually build the social trust of each other enough to actually love each other enough to have a society together. And so, it's, a lot of us are asking, because the stories we've been told about our lives aren't sufficient to actually give us something to live for, to love ourselves and each other more. We're grappling or wrestling. So again, it starts out with Jim being, kidnapped and tied to a chair by this home invader. And it's so funny because so much of the horror that's being made today, I wrote about this for Aaron Wrenn in the, about the movie Weapons, where it's we just don't know our neighbors. We don't know each other. And so it's a society of strangers. It's a stranger society. So you have somebody who comes in, literally with a mask, and he's a stranger and he's scary because you don't know him. You don't know what he's there for. And he just starts out asking the abstract questions like, what's the meaning of life? Do we have free will? Do things? And you can wrestle with these things intellectually and you can give answers to them. And that's important to do because we need to have a relationship with reality. But you also have to start applying that personally because, you can use that as defense mechanism against actually asking the questions of how it applies to your life. And so again, then, you have the next person who comes in, Finn, he seems nice and he's more kind of like, okay, I want to help you and I want to help him. Well, let's talk this out together. But that becomes therapy culture. Yes. And so, and that's sort of this fear of actually these people who say they want to help us are actually there to manipulate us. Cause it's they're trying to make everything too nice, even though it's not a nice situation. And so how do we trust reality? Then how do we trust our neighbor? And then, you have a third person who comes in who's Fran, and she becomes sort of a representative of sort of the giving up in terms of does this, but then also the hope of let's get rid of all these questions and just say, can we love each other? And ultimately the answer comes with, how do I actually apply these values of what I believe about the world? Yep. If I actually believe that the Christian story of the world is true, broadly speaking, that love God and love others is the point of life in a concrete way, how do I actually live that out in my life and don't just leave it in my head? And that becomes the redemption of the world. And so again, I'm analyzing this like a film critic, right?
Yeah, you are.
Because that's draft 2. That's what you do.
That's where you're at.
But when you're writing this, I'm just saying this would be cool to do. This makes me cry. This is meaningful to me to say this, to do this. This is what, and it feels right because again, I was raised by, I'm a pastor's kid, and I was raised in this imagination of C.S. Lewis and the church fathers and Christian thinking, and not just Christian thinking, but Christian imagining that is so much more beautiful to me than what I typically see either the, Hollywood or the faith-based world coming out with. Although I have to say, again, as a film critic, somebody who's been doing this for 5 years professionally, faith-based films have come a long way. And I've actually become I become less mean in my reviews since, and people have noted this, and I'm not because I'm actually seeing improvement. It's like, okay, you're not just circling the drain, you are actually growing in the right way. So this critique can be an encouragement and say, here's, but that's been the thing is, can we put something out in the world that actually is beautiful in this way? And that's the reason like you said, going back to what you said, why did you make it so complex? Why did you make it so many layers? Because that's the part of myself that's what I want to see from the rest of the world. And that's the part of myself I want to share with other people. And I go, that was definitely a frustration to people who for so many years were trying to be like, just make your movie. And I was like, yes, but it has to
be right.
Do all of these things. And how but it's never going to actually get made if you don't figure this out. And so finally I was able to, with the help of many people, square that circle.
And you did very well. You hear it said a lot that people write what they know, and you've shared a lot about how the personal parallels and your own frustrations, your own thought processes. How much are you Jim in the story?
A lot of me. And I say this because I was wrote it in 30 days. I realized I don't have time to invent a character. Really, I just have to write what flows out of me. And there's a lot, again, of me that lives in my own head, and both in my imagination and in my thinking. And there's a lot of me that, again, wants to make the right decision rather than to make a decision. And again, I've based a lot of the stuff with Jim and Kathy on previous relationships I've had and the conversations that happened and the ways that I've had to learn to open myself up and think, oh, there's a different perspective that I have that when you allow someone else to say, actually, I don't see things that way, to expand your imagination to include the point of views of others without losing yourself in the process. Again, there's this, I think there's something I fear, and there's a lot of, and this was very much some intentional, but a lot of men specifically fear is that if they open themselves up to listening to the voices of women in their lives, that they will become sort of a doormat for them. And there's a lot of reasons that men have that fear and stuff like that. But I have navigated that for myself in ways that have said, no, that's not true. You don't have to do it that way. And so that was something I wanted to express in the story in that regard also. So yeah, there's so much, again, and there's probably more. You can watch this movie and psychoanalyze and find things that even I didn't find. But definitely, just practically speaking, it's like I'm not going to try to invent a different voice that's different from mine. I'm going to write these characters all, with different personalities and different histories and different people, but also the voices in my head talking back and forth to each other. In the first draft is the voices in my head fighting with each other.
Yeah. I felt, even your actor, I was like, this is Joseph.
Okay, so funny story there. I met Kyle Travanovich in college, and I was introduced, I swear to God, this is the Hard Faith podcast, so that means something.
Yep.
But I was sitting down at lunch, and somebody ran up to me who was just barely an acquaintance and said, "Come with me. I have found your clone." And just grabbed me, I followed her, and then I went over and I met him, and we just became the fast of friends. And the whole first year, people were like, do you know Kyle Travanovich? Because he's exactly like you.
Yeah.
And so that was one of the things. It's like, okay, if I'm telling this story that's just very like my voice, like who's the person who could do this without half trying is Kyle Travanovich. And
yeah, I thought maybe he was a brother, a cousin, a clone.
No,
it's amazing. When it started, I was like, Joseph starring in his film. Nope, that's not Joseph. But it looks like Joseph. It acts like Joseph.
Well, and it's so funny. What I always love to joke, you talk about Christopher Nolan, there's so many movies that I watch where it's like, okay, this is director stand-in actor, where it's like if you watch any Greta Gerwig film with Saoirse Ronan and Timothy Chalamet. It's like, oh, Saoirse Ronan looks like Greta Gerwig and Timothy Chalamet looks like Noah Baumbach.
Yep.
And then, of course, every single Christopher Nolan protagonist is dressed and his hair is styled exactly like him. And so so there's definitely that aspect. But again, in this case, there was an intentionality aspect of it, is that I'm going to do what comes most naturally. And yes, this is going to definitely, and again, he's not me in every way, but I'm definitely going to allow him to take on far more of myself. And that became, again, a fun exercise because people could watch it that way and say, yeah, this is the artist wrestling with stuff in a very personal way. And that makes it more intimate.
Absolutely. It's actually extremely intimate and vulnerable. One of the topics that you really, I think, wrestled with well is the tension, especially in considering romance. And I think a lot of guys consider this. I know I did for many years before I got married. But the tension between ambition and self-sacrifice and sacrifice. If I get married, then I can't do this. Or if I get married, how can I still do this? Especially in today's culture, today's world, American culture, rugged individualism. How do you square those two? I know that that's what Jim or Joseph versus the Future does, but what is your message, or what do you hope filmmaker or audiences that watch your film, what do you hope the message is that they get from watching it?
So there's two sides to this. One is, there's definitely that. And again, some of this comes from my personal history, not just wrestling in terms of relationships, but wrestling in terms of, how do I have this dream, I have this mission, how much of this is selfish, how much of this is something that is worthy being pursued, and how much do I wrestle with the responsibilities to actually be, a responsible human being who makes my dream God's dream and not just my dream. And there's interesting data on this where it's very interesting. People look at marriage as a capstone rather than a cornerstone is how people talk about it. It's like, okay, I'm going to get married once I've done all the other things in my life and set myself up, in a particular way, because I feel like getting married is going to get in the way of those things, rather than saying, okay, I'm going to get married in a way and it's going to support the life that I want to build and be the best version of that. And a lot of, again, I think there's about the majority of Americans see career fulfillment as more important than marriage for their happiness, even though the studies actually show this sort of the other way around, typically. So I think that there's a lot of that's going there. I think that, again, I have made a lot of choices to say, I'm going to put off things that would get in the way of my dreams because I think they're going to get in the way. And I think that some of those choices were good and some of them were not. And I've grown more to see that you should definitely look at, how do I become somebody that is fulfilling God's dream for life, and what God's dream is for human beings to be responsible adult individuals and that means that I'm going to be building the kingdom of God, which means being connected with other people, loving other people and loving God. I guess the message of the film specifically is, don't do that in your own head. Now, again, you can think about it and think through it, but actually live it out. The climax of the film is actually going and talking to the other person, is going and talking, being relationship with other people. So whether or not this is, again, making your film, it's like, don't spend years writing your screenplay.
Right.
Make your movie. Yeah. If it's, I want to get married, don't spend years just trying to wait for the perfect person. Actually build relationships, not, build relationships with wider community that can introduce you to other people, where you'll meet other people, but also just have relationships that actually teach you what a relationship is like. And I think that's the crisis we're facing now, is that people are not even having relationships with other people. They're not even going out and trying to, make it in the film industry, make their film and stuff like that, because they're trapped in their dream rather than the reality. And I think that, it's partly because, people say that the, first sin is, not trusting God, that he will cause things to work out for your good. And it's like, you have to put, have so much control over it that if you make a mistake, things will go badly. And I think that having that trust that ultimately, at the bottom of all things, there's something I kind of say in the movie, reality itself is good because God made it. Mm-hmm. It's corrupt by sin and all these other things, but he's also in control of it. So if you actually go and find people to love, go out and try to make that dream a reality and have reality push back on you to shape whatever dreams you have, then you will actually have a dream that doesn't isolate you from reality and the world and God and other people, but one that puts you in relationship with them. And I guess that would be probably the message of the film, is have a right view of reality and then go apply it in the real world.
I love it. Joseph Holmes. Dang! Man, not just a movie, but it's like a sermon and deep, deep, deep theology. And I also feel like an admonition, like you watch this movie and I felt like inspired, like I felt like, I like Jim. Even too, I think that conversation, and I don't want to give away everything in the movie, but we touched on a little bit here, but the conversation he has with his fiance at the end, I think is so artful and so mature and and you can see, the devils and his angels on both sides of the shoulder and all the thoughts in his head. But there's just a lot to consume and digest. It's a very rich feast, this film. And it's something that I look forward to watching again, and I know our audiences will enjoy watching. And I hope that I'm going to do a little shameless plug here, but I hope that at the Hard Faith Film Festival in New York City, on December 6th, you'll talk about your film and your process of making this movie, your first feature film as a film critic, with our audiences at the Hard Faith Film Festival for our first ever New York City Film Festival on December 6th. Will you do that, Joseph?
I mean, are you asking me?
I'm asking you.
If I will talk about the movie I spent so many years in front of a live audience?
Heck yeah, I am.
I guess you could twist my arm.
Boom. You heard it here, folks, at the Hard Faith New York City. Shameless plug, December 6th. Come on out to Manhattan to the Producers Club, hardfaithfest.com, and you'll see Joseph Holmes and hear more of his brilliance and talk about Jim/Joseph versus the future. Joseph, where can our audiences follow along with your filmmaking journey and specifically about Jim versus the future?
Well, you can go to my website, josephholmesstudios.com, that has the links to all my work and where you can find it. You can also, of course, I do a weekly podcast, The Overthinkers, with Nathan Clarkson. Again, he was producer and actor on this project. So basically, it's a very overthinkers film. If you enjoy The Overthinkers, you'll get a big kick out of this film. And also, again, Nathan, I could not have made this without him. And he does a great job in the film. And he did, you didn't have no idea what he did behind the scenes to make this. So you can definitely check us out on The Overthinkers as well. And then, of course, you can follow me on all the socials, on the Twitter X's, the Facebooks, the Instagrams. You search my name, you can find them there as I'm putting out there. And of course, you can check out my movie, which is, on DVD and for rental on all the major platforms where you get your movies. I really hope you check those out, and because the more people watch it, the more likely I will get money to make my next project and make a terrible project that has too much money behind it, and therefore nobody can say no to me, and I can become another cautionary tale.
Let's make that a problem. Let's make this film such a success that Joseph has less limitations.
Exactly. Thank you so much again, and thank you so much, Spencer, for putting great art out in the world too, and making a space for people to make projects like mine and get it word out there. You really are doing God's work, I would say, in a figurative and literal sense.
Thank you, Joseph. It was such a pleasure having you at the Hard Faith Fest with Alyssa. I see your award up there. Best screenplay, best writing. And we'd known each other throughout the years. It was so wonderful working together on the set of Bright Sky. So proud of you and your first feature film. And I'm just really glad the Lord brought us together. Really love you, man.
Same man. It's been a true blessing to have you as a friend and as a creative partner on this journey together.
Well, thank you so much for listening to the Hard Faith podcast. Check out Jim versus the Future and Joseph Holmes and the Overthinkers.
Thanks so much for listening to the Hard Faith podcast. Please subscribe and share. Visit hardfaith.org to learn more.